If you want to keep everybody informed of what's going on with the food shortages around the world, not just what you're seeing on the shelves, not just the factories that are being shut down deliberately or catching fire conveniently, but also some of the bizarre things we're seeing with livestock. Obviously, I covered the cattle in Kansas that just died in a heat wave. They all just flipped upside down. Not like 2 cattle died from the heat wave, all of them, thousands upon thousands, just happened to die, and they tell us that it's to do with a heat wave and, of course, climate change, which I'll mention again in this video, tying into what's going on in Kansas, because there's more going on in Kansas. But I'll start here with this story because, I mean, this is just another story where people will be like, oh, you know, that kind of stuff happens all the time. Until you actually look at the story and you see the fact that, well, this should never have happened in the first place. And if the sheep which were involved, 15,000 sheep, drowned at the sea in Sudan because, well, they overstuffed the boat. That's right. You know, like when you get on a boat or you get on an elevator, there's like a weight limit. Sometimes they're like, do not exceed like 20,000 pounds, do not exceed that. Well, apparently, you know, shipping livestock, which is food, which was worth close to $4 million. They just were like, you know what? What's the limit on here? The limit is 9,000 sheep. That was the limit that the boat can handle. So, you know, maybe you think about it, you're like, well, you know, sometimes that stuff can happen. Well, maybe if they were like, hey, we have 9,050 sheep, and maybe they were like, I don't know, that's kind of a risk, even 50 more. I mean, that's X amount of pounds. The ship could go down. Not only could we lose all the livestock, which is $4 million, some of us might drown at sea, and our boat will be sunk. So we'll lose that, which is very expensive as well. No. It was 15,800 sheep that they squished onto this ship, this carrier, to bring the livestock, to ship the livestock, with a limit of 9,000. So as we see all of these bizarre things happening around the world, with food shortages, you know, farmers being told to destroy their crops, we see cattle flipping upside down. We're supposed to believe that these people were so stupid. They had a 9,000 capacity on their ship that they put 15,800. None of them thought for 1 second, hey, the boat might sink. Oh, right. Because what happens in these situations is the person who owned the sheep obviously had had an insurance policy on it. We like to call it bagel lightning, right? How convenient. You know what bagel lightning is, the youngsters out there? When fires deliberately happen, they collect the insurance money. It has a different name, but we can only call it bagel lightning now. And, you know, it goes down into the sea and somebody collects the money for the sheep. So they don't care about losing the sheep because they're told, hey, we're trying to kill off all the livestock around the world, you know, because climate change and global warming. So here's 4 million. It's what is it? $4 million worth of sheep. Okay, we'll give you 4,500,000, or we'll give you 5 million. How about that? And you know, put them out there, oversuck the boat, and then all the guys at the ship, they're like, yo, you don't think they're going to be handed a brand new ship that they didn't have an insurance policy on it? I mean, we can't think that people are this stupid to operate like this. I know that we have people who are really, really dumb, obviously the ones who willingly put poison in their bodies. So we do have a lot of dumb people that we live among. But can we really believe that people who have a boat were like, you know, it's like putting 15 people in a car or something. I mean, it's like overcrowding an airplane. Or wouldn't you be nervous? Like, hey, the plane might crash. We might all die. Of course they knew that. This is being done on purpose. Livestock are being killed around the country. Crops are being destroyed around the world, I should say, excuse me. Because the food shortage isn't just here in America. It is worldwide. Now, obviously on the other end of that, and I'll get back into the sheep in a second. On the other end of that, we have what's going on in Ukraine, right? They're telling us that wheat. That's all we heard about. Oh man, Ukraine is one of the world suppliers of wheat. Huh? This little piece of land over here, the smaller than the state of Texas, is responsible for the world's wheat production. Nobody else can grow wheat. Apparently can only grow in this specific spot. Give me a break. Okay? So we have our own wheat supply here in America. Well, we did in Kansas, but guess what's conveniently happening there? The heat wave and the dry conditions are scorching people's wheat crops in Kansas. So not only are cattle flipping upside down, but the wheat is not growing. How convenient is that? And of course, instead of, you know, looking at it and saying, well, it's been hot before, Don't they water the crops? You know what I mean? I mean, come on, really? Don't they? No? I mean, we also know that they have like I covered the thing in Dubai with weather manipulation, how they can actually bring weather, bring in storms, create rain to end droughts. Remember I talked about that because they were using graphene. People were like, well, why don't they do that with the fires here in America, like in California? Well, because why would they do that? They're the ones who create the fire. Why would they put the fire out that they create? Right? Come on now. Let's think. So they obviously could if they wanted to, but I mean, we would like to think and believe that farmers would actually water the crops, especially if they're going to make a lot of money from it. It wouldn't be, to rely on. I mean, come on, really? But anyway, the answer for all this stuff is the continued answer that we get, which is climate change. So on top of these things, what you have to factor in is also the fact that the government wants more control over people. We just saw that with the outbreak, right? It was all about control. Everybody with common sense knows it. Well, what's the best way to control people? Controlling food and water. Because that's the only thing people really need to survive. For their flesh to survive is food and water. They don't need their phones, believe it or not. Okay? They need food and water. So if the government controls those and the government limits what people can grow on their own and limits what farmers can do and, does all this type of stuff and kills off livestock, then they can bring about their soylent food, which is people, right? They could bring about their soylent food where you can have rations and the government will give it to you, but you have to obey the government. That means if you want to eat and you want water, the government will give it to you, but you got to take the mark and you got to do everything else and obey. Because that's what this is about. So hot, dry conditions are scorching the wheat crop in Kansas. They say unusually high heat wave in Kansas, which is known for its fields of waist-high golden wheat. But this year, the blistering conditions have withered some of the crop into short, patchy straw. Standing in one of the fields in northwest Kansas, Chris Tanner wonders if it'll even make it through harvest. He said, like this right here, as he shows some wheat, he says it's going to end up being nothing. It'll blow out the back of the combine. You can see the seeds kind of exposed there. It'll shatter out even before we get there. So the farmers are showing the local news media outlets that they can't grow wheat. And they're blaming it on hot conditions. Now, that's something you could believe, right? You could say, well, it is hot, so the crops aren't growing. The common zombie is going to believe everything they hear. So, okay. But when you factor in all these other convenient things that are going on, when you factor in during the outbreak that story after story came up, and it was actually reported in the mainstream media that farmers were told to destroy their crops. They were saying that farmers were telling them to destroy their crops because they were afraid that the 19er, the C19, was going to spread through the food. So instead of worrying about, well, maybe you'll catch a cough and a sneeze, but it's worth it to have food. No, we were more interested in destroying food than catching a cold. So we destroyed crops. Then on top of that, we had story after story come out where farmers were being paid more money from our taxes by our government to destroy their crops. And they just blame it on the outbreak because the dumb person out there will just go, oh, okay. That's why they did it. It's not some type of government conspiracy. No, not at all. It couldn't be. Cattle just flipping upside down. As we know, Bill Gates and the rest of them are constantly telling us about how we need to all go to plant-based food and we need to destroy livestock. So they conveniently just flip upside down. Then this story, because remember, this is worldwide. It doesn't really matter where it's coming from, because it's happening everywhere. All people's food supplies are being cut off. So here's sheep that are being shipped all around, right, out there. And it could be, once it's processed, could be shipped here to America. But no, they decided it's better to drown the sheep. And we're not talking about 500, which would still be a lot. We're talking about 15,000 sheep being put on a boat with a capacity of 9,000. That was the limit of how much the boat could hold. And they put 15,000 on. And again, I get it. People could look at it and they could go, oh, mistakes are made. No. This isn't a mistake. A mistake is, oops, we put 9,050 on and it sunk due to being overweight. And maybe you could look at it and maybe say that it was an accident. when double the amount, almost double, is being crammed on. Think about how much more weight that is, where the boat is sinking, and nobody who owns the boat, who runs the ship, was like, hey, we might go down. And then we'd have to do all this labor of getting the sheep out of the water, and we could die, and we'll lose our ship, and all our belongings on the ship, which I'm sure conveniently they had no belongings on the ship. I'll tell you that. They just happened to not bring any, whatever they needed, would need. I mean, it is so unbelievable. All these stories that are popping up. And the mainstream media, when they cover it, what do they tell you? They say, this is normal. So, food factories shut down all the time. Oh, do they? How many in the last year? 100? The thing with the baby formula, which I covered recently, if you didn't see the video, I'll just recap it for you. You've all heard about the baby formula and how the FDA shut down a factory. The biggest one, the Abbott factory, which is the biggest producer of baby formula. They shut it down because there was a cross-contamination, which would be a quick fix. They quickly, they said it was a quick fix, but the FDA didn't come back for months and months and months to approve them reopening. Then there was pushback about it, so they reopened it. And what conveniently happened 2 weeks later? A flood. A flood wiped it out, and now there's no timetable for it to reopen. What does that tell you? It tells you that they wanted it shut down, and they don't want it to reopen, ever. Ever. At least not anytime soon. A flood conveniently just shuts it down. They have all these billion-dollar companies, baby food formula. They don't have flood prevention. Oh, you can't prevent a flood. Oh, okay. Well, it's really convenient that it hit right after you reopened. After the only reason you reopened was because people were starting to question the FDA, which they don't want anyone ever doing. You can't question, and they don't want you questioning the FDA. They know that people are starting to question the CDC, but they've put bans in, especially here on YouTube, about even questioning the CDC. But they want to make sure the FDA, because if you suddenly find out, like the stuff I've covered over the last 5 years, that there's stuffing weed killer in your Cheerios, it might make you suspicious of these government agencies, which I've covered, because they are stuffing weed killer and other things inside of your processed foods. But again, if people start questioning FDA, that's something they don't want. So they said, hey, well, people are questioning the FDA because we haven't reopened it, and people are getting suspicious of all these factory burn downs. Let's reopen it, but we don't want it open. Well, what could we do? We'll create a natural disaster. We'll just turn HAARP on. We'll just do weather manipulation. We'll create a flood. Oh, that's a great idea, because then nobody can blame anything, right? And that's how it works. That's why weather manipulation is so important to them, because they can wipe out states like they do to Florida, like they do to Texas, like they do to Louisiana. They can just do it over and over and over again, and nobody can ask a question about it. And then people like me and you who talk about it, how they're being targeted because the amount of storms that are going through these, people just go, they're out of their minds. They're nuts. And then you, of course, you could recap and go back to Kennedy and all these other people who've talked about weather control 100 years ago. And people don't realize we have that type of technology, but they also don't want to believe that the government can do that. So even things like this drought in Kansas, you could point a finger at, well, they create droughts. Well, they do create droughts, and then they blame it on global warming. It's convenient for them. I showed you the video clip, which I won't put in here, but I've showed you in the past, like even the Disney documentary thing that they rolled out where they talked about it. And they said, oh, isn't this great? We could do cloud seeding and weather manipulation. And if there's a storm heading somewhere, we'll just veer it off. Oh, so in other words, if there's rain headed towards Kansas, they can just veer it off. How convenient. Because they want, Kansas is where all of our food is now being grown, which is, of course, the majority of our food, not all of it, but a majority of our food is being grown in Kansas. And it's very, very convenient that, by the way, Plum Island, which had the Center for, the Animal Disease Center there on Plum Island, where they created Lyme's disease, where they've done all these mutations on animals. That's where all the animals wash up on shore that are mutated. Now they're doing these experiments not on animals, on humans. We're all part of this experiment right now. Even those of us who didn't take the potion, because these people are walking, they are ticking time bombs, the people who took it, and they're shedding onto other people. But anyway, that's stuff I can only talk about on the website. Not here, because they don't want you to know truth here. They want you to be conform to their narrative of them trying to kill you, but pretend like they love you and care about you. That's what YouTube and all these other platforms are. But I talk about that over on the website. But again, the Plum Island Animal Disease Center moved from Plum Island conveniently to Kansas, where all our food grows, so they can pollute and do stuff to our food. Isn't that convenient? That's another coincidence, of course, that they don't want you to know about and they don't want me to talk about. But this is what's going on, folks. We have sheep drowning. We have livestock just being destroyed. We have cattle flipping upside down. We have factories burning down. We have airplanes flying into food manufacturing plants. We have baby formula factories closing, reopening, and then getting flooded out. We have wheat drying up conveniently. It's like, wheat is clearly one of the things they targeted. You have Ukraine with the wheat, then you have a lot of people came out and said what? They're like, oh, Ukraine, makes our wheat. Even heard that some, right-wing mainstream media outlets talk about, oh, well, why don't we just grow it here in America? Like a bunch of people were saying that because it's pretty clear, why don't we? And just like, why don't we get our own oil and all that stuff? Because they want globalism. They don't want us to be dependent. They don't want nationalism to exist. So anyway, they've heard, a lot of people were like, well, why would we need Ukraine for wheat? People were laughing at the narrative. Well, they probably were like, okay, well, let's just destroy the wheat here too. So people shut up and stop asking questions. And very easily they can do that and create all these things with the weather and then blame it on the weather. It's very easy to blame it on the weather and blame it on climate change because nobody has to be held accountable. It's the invisible boogeyman. And then they just conveniently go, that's Mother Nature, or they blame it on God. Right? It's the only time they believe in God is when they can blame something on him. That's how convenient it is for them. But the rest of us know what's actually going on here. So we have food shortages continuing around the world. I'll keep an eye on it and keep updating people